In the remote village of Kimbala, nestled between the rolling hills of East Africa, lived a woman named Amara whose life was defined by struggle and humiliation. Her small mud brick house sat at the edge of the village, isolated and crumbling like her spirit. The thatched roof leaked during the rainy season, turning her floor into a muddy mess, and the walls bore cracks that seemed to grow wider with each passing year, mirroring the growing gap between her and the rest of the community. Amara was 42 years old, a widow who had lost her husband Kwame to a mysterious illness 5 years earlier. The village healer had tried everything: herbs, rituals, prayers to the ancestors, but nothing could save him. With no children to support her and no family willing to help, she survived by doing the most menial jobs for the villagers. She washed clothes by the river until her hands cracked and bled, tended to sick animals that no one else would touch, and sometimes begged for scraps of food from the local market when the day's work wasn't enough. The villagers looked down on her with contempt that bordered on cruelty. They whispered behind her back, calling her cursed and unlucky. Some even suggested that she had brought misfortune upon her husband, that her very presence was a bad omen. Children would cross to the other side of the dirt road when they saw her coming, their mothers pulling them close and whispering warnings about the cursed woman. Shopkeepers would often refuse to serve her, claiming she brought bad fortune to their businesses and would scare away other customers. "Look at Amara," they would say, pointing at her worn-out clothes that had been mended so many times they were more patched than original fabric. "She can't even afford proper shoes. What kind of woman can't take care of herself? Maybe the ancestors are punishing her for something terrible she did." The village chief, a proud man named Kofi who wore his authority like a heavy cloak, was particularly cruel. He was a man who measured worth by material possessions and social status, and Amara represented everything he despised about weakness and failure. During village meetings held under the great baobab tree, he would publicly shame her, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd like a whip. "Some people are born to struggle," he declared one evening as Amara sat in the back of the gathering, her head bowed in shame. "And some people attract poverty like flies to spoiled meat. They drag down the entire community with their misfortune." The women of the village were no kinder. They would gather at the well each morning, their colorful dresses bright against the red earth, and speak in hushed tones about Amara's latest perceived failures. They criticized everything: how she carried herself, how she spoke, even how she grieved for her deceased husband. "She should have remarried by now," said Kasai, the baker's wife, as she filled her water jug. "A proper woman finds a way to secure her future. But look at her. Who would want such a cursed creature?" "I heard she talks to herself at night," added Nia, the chief's sister-in-law. "She's probably communicating with evil spirits. That's why nothing good ever happens to her." Despite the constant humiliation and social isolation, Amara maintained her dignity through sheer force of will. She would wake up before dawn every day, when the village was still quiet and she could move about without facing the judgmental stares. She would walk to the communal well to fetch water, her bare feet navigating the familiar path in the darkness. Then she would tend to her small garden behind her house, the only place where she felt truly at peace. The soil in her garden was different from the rest of the village, darker, richer, and more fertile than anywhere else in Kimbala. It had a strange smell that sometimes made her dizzy, almost like metal mixed with earth. Her vegetables grew better there than anywhere else, which only added to the villagers' suspicions about her supposed supernatural connections. "Even her garden is unnatural," they would whisper. "No one else's tomatoes grow that large. She must be using dark magic." But for Amara, that garden was her sanctuary. She would spend hours there, talking to her plants as if they were old friends, sharing her sorrows and fears with the only living things that didn't judge her. The earth seemed to respond to her care, yielding vegetables that kept her from starving when no other work was available. One particularly harsh day in the dry season, after being turned away from 3 different jobs, cleaning houses, helping with harvest, and even carrying water for an elderly woman, Amara found herself completely defeated. She had been rejected because, according to the potential employers, her presence would bring bad luck to their endeavors. She sat in her garden as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and wept openly for the first time in months. She had nothing left, no food in her house, no money hidden away, and no hope for tomorrow. The villagers had made it clear that she was unwanted, a constant reminder of what failure and abandonment looked like in their close-knit community. "Kwame," she whispered to the evening air, addressing her deceased husband, "if you can hear me, please send me a sign. I don't know how much longer I can endure this. They treat me like I'm not even human." The wind rustled through the leaves of the small tree beside her house, and for a moment she imagined she could hear his voice telling her to be strong, to keep faith. But as the darkness deepened and the village settled into its nightly rhythm, she felt more alone than ever. That night, as she lay on her thin mat in her empty house, listening to her stomach growl with hunger, Amara made a silent promise to herself and to the memory of her husband. If God or the ancestors were listening, if there was any justice in the world, she would find a way to change her circumstances. She would show everyone in Kimbala that they had been wrong about her, that she was more than their cruel words and dismissive glances. "I will not die in shame," she whispered into the darkness. "Somehow, someway, I will prove my worth." Little did she know that beneath her feet, buried deep in the earth she tended every day with such love and care, lay the answer to her prayers. The same soil that the villagers mocked as cursed would soon reveal itself to be the key to transforming not just her life, but the entire village that had rejected her so completely. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with images of respect, abundance, and the sweet taste of vindication. She had no way of knowing that these dreams were not just fantasy, but a glimpse of the extraordinary future that awaited her. 3 months after her lowest point, when the rains had come and gone and the dry season was settling over Kimbala once again, Amara began to notice something extraordinary happening in her garden. The changes were subtle at first. Her tomatoes seemed greener, her maize stalks grew taller and stronger than she had ever seen, and her peppers were more vibrant and flavorful than anything produced in the village's other gardens. But it was more than just the exceptional growth of her plants that caught her attention. She began to notice a thick, dark liquid seeping through the soil in certain spots, particularly in a corner of her garden where she had always struggled to grow anything successfully. The substance would appear after she watered her plants, bubbling up through the earth like a slow, dark spring. At first, she thought it was just muddy water from the recent rains, perhaps mixed with decomposed organic matter. But this substance was different. It was viscous, almost oily, and had a strong, almost metallic smell that reminded her of the tools her late husband used to maintain. When she touched it, the liquid left a residue on her fingers that was impossible to wash off with just water and wouldn't come clean even with the harsh soap she used for laundry. Curious and increasingly concerned about what this might mean for her garden, Amara began digging carefully in the areas where the dark liquid appeared. She used her hands and a broken hoe that she had found discarded near the village dump, working slowly and methodically. With each shovelful of earth she removed, more of the mysterious substance bubbled up from below, sometimes with such force that it surprised her. The deeper she dug, the more abundant the dark liquid became. Soon, she had created several small holes in her garden, each one filling with the black substance that seemed to come from somewhere deep underground. The smell became stronger, and sometimes she would feel lightheaded after working near the holes for too long. Word of Amara's strange discovery quickly spread through the village, carried by curious children who had been spying on her from behind the fence that separated her property from the rest of the community. But the news was not received with interest or concern. Instead, it became another source of mockery and suspicion. "Look at the crazy woman digging holes in her yard," laughed Fatima, one of the village's wealthiest traders, as she addressed a group of women at the market. "She's probably looking for buried treasure like a foolish child. Or maybe she's trying to dig her way to her dead husband." The laughter that followed was cruel and sharp, echoing through the marketplace and reaching Amara's ears as she worked. But she had grown accustomed to their mockery and continued her investigation, driven by an instinct she couldn't quite explain. Chief Kofi visited her property with a group of village elders, their faces stern with disapproval. They stood at the edge of her garden, looking down at the holes she had dug with expressions of disgust and concern. "Amara," Chief Kofi said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "you're destroying perfectly good farming land with this nonsense. These holes are an eyesore and probably dangerous. Fill them immediately or face punishment from the village council. We won't have you making our village look like a mining camp." Elder Jengo, an old man whose opinion carried weight in the community, nodded gravely. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we expect from someone who consorts with dark forces. She's probably trying to summon something from the underground spirits." But Amara had a feeling that this discovery was more important than any of them realized. She had heard stories from traveling merchants and traders who occasionally passed through Kimbala, tales of a valuable black liquid that came from deep underground, something that could make people wealthy beyond imagination. Could this be the same substance? The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that she needed to find out exactly what she had discovered. Despite the ridicule and threats from the village leadership, she decided to take some of the liquid to the nearest town, Mwanza, which was 3 hours away by foot along a dusty road that wound through the hills. She prepared for the journey carefully, filling an old plastic bottle with a mysterious substance and wrapping it in cloth to prevent any spills. She also collected some of the soil from around the holes, thinking that might be important for analysis. Early one morning, before the village was fully awake, she set off on her journey, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments from the few early risers who saw her leaving. The walk to Mwanza was long and tiring, made worse by the weight of her concerns and the suspicious glances from people she passed along the way. By the time she reached the town, the sun was high overhead and her feet were sore from the rough road. In Mwanza, she approached several shopkeepers and traders, showing them the bottle and explaining what she had found. Most dismissed her immediately, some with laughter and others with irritation. They thought she was trying to sell them dirty water or some kind of traditional medicine they didn't want. "Get away from here with your nonsense," said one shopkeeper, waving her away from his store. "I don't have time for village superstitions." But Amara persisted, driven by an inner certainty that she was onto something important. Finally, she encountered an elderly man sitting outside a small bookshop, reading a newspaper and sipping tea. He introduced himself as Professor Mwenj, a former geology teacher who had retired to Mwanza after spending decades studying the land and its resources. When Amara showed him the bottle and described where she had found the substance, Professor Mwenj's casual demeanor changed completely. He examined the liquid carefully, holding it up to the light and noting its consistency and color. He asked Amara detailed questions about the location, the depth of her digging, the smell of the substance, and whether there was more where it came from. "Tell me," he said, his voice becoming more serious, "when you dig these holes, does the liquid continue to seep out? Does it seem to come from deeper underground?" "Yes," Amara replied, growing excited by his interest. "No matter how much I remove, more keeps bubbling up. And the smell is very strong, especially when the sun is hot." Professor Mwenj nodded thoughtfully, then asked her to wait while he conducted a simple test. He took a small amount of the liquid and carefully applied a match to it. Amara watched in amazement as the substance ignited with a blue flame, burning steadily and producing that same distinctive smell. His eyes widened with excitement, and he looked at Amara with a mixture of astonishment and respect. "My dear woman," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained excitement, "do you understand what you have brought me? This is crude oil, what some people call black gold. If there is as much as you describe on your property, you may be sitting on a fortune that could change not just your life, but the lives of everyone in your village." Amara felt her heart racing as the implications of his words sank in. Could it be true? Could the same earth that the villagers mocked her for tending actually contain the key to unimaginable wealth? Professor Mwenj spent the next hour explaining to Amara what crude oil was, how it formed deep underground over millions of years, and why it was so valuable in the modern world. He told her about countries that had become wealthy from oil discoveries, about families who had gone from poverty to prosperity overnight, about the transformative power of this black liquid. "But you must be very careful," he warned. "This discovery could attract attention from people who might try to take advantage of you. You need proper legal advice and professional geological surveys to confirm what you have found." He gave her the contact information for a reputable petroleum company based in the capital city, along with the names of lawyers who specialized in mineral rights. He also wrote a letter of introduction, explaining that he believed she had made a significant discovery and recommending that the company investigate immediately. As Amara prepared to leave Mwanza, Professor Mwenj pressed a small amount of money into her hands. "For your transportation and communication expenses," he said kindly. "This discovery could change everything for you, but you must handle it properly." The walk back to Kimbala seemed shorter, despite her exhaustion. Amara's mind was racing with possibilities and plans. She clutched the bottle and the professor's letter tightly, protecting them as if they were the most precious things in the world. As she approached her village that evening, she could see the familiar sights that had always represented limitation and hardship. But now, Everything looked different. The same earth that had been her refuge might actually be her salvation. The villagers had no idea that the woman they had spent years ridiculing and dismissing was about to become the most important person in Kimbala. As she entered her small house and carefully hid the bottle and letter, Amara allowed herself to imagine, for the first time in years, that her life might actually get better. But she also knew that the Real journey was just beginning, and that the challenges ahead would be unlike anything she had ever faced. The next 6 months brought changes to Amara's life that were so dramatic they seemed almost unreal. The petroleum company's geological survey had confirmed what Professor Mwenge suspected. Her small plot of land sat on top of one of the largest untapped oil reserves in the region. The discovery was so significant that it made headlines in national newspapers and attracted attention from international energy companies. The transformation began slowly but accelerated rapidly. Within weeks of the initial survey, Amara found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity that would have overwhelmed her just months earlier. Oil company executives, government officials, and international investors began arriving in Kimbala, transforming the quiet village into a bustling hub of activity. The first major change was in how people addressed her. The same villagers who had called her cursed and unlucky now referred to her as Madame Amara and the Blessed One. The shift was so sudden and complete that it was almost comical, if it weren't so revealing of their true character. Amara, guided by the lawyers Professor Mwenge had recommended, negotiated a deal that would make her one of the wealthiest women in the country. The contract guaranteed her a substantial percentage of all oil revenues, plus significant upfront payments for drilling rights. The numbers were so large that she had difficulty comprehending them at first. "You understand," her lawyer explained during one of their meetings in the capital city, "that this contract will generate more money in a single year than most people see in several lifetimes. You will need to think carefully about how to manage this wealth." The physical transformation of her circumstances was equally dramatic. Her old mud brick house was demolished and replaced with a magnificent mansion that dominated the village skyline. The new house had running water, electricity generated by solar panels, air conditioning, and luxuries that most villagers had never seen. The contrast with her previous living conditions was so stark that visitors often commented on it. Construction crews arrived to build drilling equipment on her land, bringing with them roads, power lines, and communication systems that connected Kimbala to the outside world in ways that had never existed before. The village that had once been isolated and forgotten was suddenly on maps and in newspapers. But perhaps the most shocking change wasn't in Amara's circumstances. It was in how the villagers treated her. The transformation was so complete and shameless that it would have been amusing if it weren't so revealing of their opportunistic nature. Chief Kofi, who had once publicly humiliated her at village meetings, now showed up at her door with elaborate gifts and flowery apologies. He arrived one morning with a delegation of elders, all dressed in their finest clothes and carrying traditional offerings. "Amara, my dear sister," he said, his voice full of false warmth and respect, "I hope you can forgive the misunderstandings of the past. I always knew you were special, destined for greatness. I was just testing your character, preparing you for the important role you would play in our community's future." His words were so transparently false that Amara almost laughed. But she maintained her composure, accepting his gifts politely while noting the desperation in his eyes. The man who had once wielded absolute authority in the village now recognized that power had shifted, and he was scrambling to maintain his relevance. Fatima, the trader who had openly mocked her for digging holes in her garden, now appeared with elaborate business proposals. She had prepared detailed plans for partnerships and investment opportunities, presenting them as if she and Amara had always been close friends. "We could work together, Amara," she said, her voice honey-sweet with false friendship. "I have connections throughout the region that could help expand your wealth. We could build trading networks, develop new businesses, create opportunities for everyone." The same children who had once run away from her now gathered around her car whenever she returned from trips to the capital, hoping for coins or sweets. Their parents, who had previously warned them to stay away from the cursed woman, now encouraged them to be respectful and friendly to Madame Amara. The shopkeepers who had refused to serve her now competed for her business, offering their finest goods at discounted prices and extending credit that they had never offered before. They renovated their stores and expanded their inventory, hoping to attract the attention of their now wealthy neighbor. Amara watched all of this with a mixture of satisfaction and profound sadness. She had achieved what she had dreamed of: respect, wealth, and power. But she also saw the true nature of the people around her with crystal clarity. Their kindness was conditional, based entirely on what she could offer them. Their respect was founded on fear and greed, not genuine regard for her as a person. For several months, Amara enjoyed her newfound status. She traveled to the capital city regularly, staying in luxury hotels and attending important meetings with government ministers and international business leaders. She learned about investments, banking, and financial management from advisors who treated her with the deference reserved for the wealthy. She bought properties in the city, invested in businesses, and accumulated wealth at a pace that sometimes made her feel dizzy. Her bank accounts grew to numbers that seemed impossible, and her legal team worked constantly to manage the complex contracts and agreements that governed her oil revenues. But as the excitement of her transformation began to settle, Amara found herself sitting in her magnificent mansion one evening, looking out at the village where she had suffered for so many years, and feeling strangely empty. The money had given her everything she thought she wanted: comfort, security, respect, and power. But it hadn't filled the loneliness in her heart or erased the memories of those difficult years. More importantly, she began to notice that despite her success, the village itself hadn't changed in the ways that mattered most. Children still walked miles to attend school in torn uniforms, their families unable to afford proper supplies or clothing. Families still struggled to afford medical care when illness struck, often traveling great distances to find doctors who could help them. The wells still provided contaminated water that made people sick, and many homes still lacked electricity or proper sanitation. The roads were still unpaved and dangerous during the rainy season, and the village's young people still left for opportunities in distant cities because there was nothing for them at home. The oil that had made her wealthy was transforming her personal circumstances, but it wasn't yet transforming the community that had shaped her. The same problems that had made life difficult for her as a poor woman were still making life difficult for her neighbors, despite the wealth that was literally flowing from the ground beneath their feet. As Amara reflected on her journey from poverty to prosperity, she began to understand that true wealth wasn't just about what you could accumulate for yourself. The respect she had gained was hollow because it was based on fear and greed rather than genuine regard. The power she wielded was lonely because it isolated her from authentic human connection. She thought about her late husband Kwame, who had always taught her that the measure of a person's worth wasn't in what they owned, but in what they contributed to the lives of others. She remembered how he had shared their meager resources with neighbors in need, even when they had barely enough for themselves. "What would Kwame think of me now?" she wondered aloud, sitting in her luxury living room surrounded by expensive furniture and art. "Would he be proud of my success, or disappointed that I'm enjoying wealth while others still suffer?" That night, as she lay in her comfortable bed in her air-conditioned bedroom, Amara made a decision that would define her legacy and show the village what real leadership looked like. She would use her wealth not just to secure her own future, but to transform the community that had rejected her, to prove that true power came from lifting others up rather than standing above them. The woman who had once been mocked for her poverty was about to show everyone what real wealth looked like. Amara's transformation from wealthy individual to community leader began with a carefully planned announcement that would forever change how the village of Kimbala understood leadership and generosity. She spent weeks preparing her speech, consulting with advisors, and developing a comprehensive plan that would address the most pressing needs of her community. On a warm Sunday morning, she sent word throughout the village that she would be making an important announcement at the traditional meeting place under the great baobab tree. The entire community gathered, from the youngest children to the oldest elders, curiosity and anticipation crackling through the air like electricity. Standing before the same people who had once mocked her, ridiculed her, and treated her as an outcast, Amara began to speak. Her voice was calm but filled with determination, carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "My brothers and sisters," she began, her eyes sweeping across the familiar faces, "6 months ago, most of you would not have given me the time of day. You saw me as cursed, as a burden, as someone who brought misfortune to our community. Today, I stand before you not to seek revenge for those years of pain, but to share a vision for our future." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "The oil beneath our feet, this gift from the earth, belongs to all of us. This village raised me, taught me resilience, and showed me the true meaning of struggle. Now it's time for me to give back, to show you what real wealth looks like." Her first project was the construction of a modern educational complex that would serve not just Kimbala, but 6 neighboring villages as well. She hired the best architects from the capital city and internationally recognized educators to design a facility that would rival schools in the most developed parts of the country. The school complex included multiple buildings with spacious classrooms, computer labs equipped with the latest technology, science laboratories that could conduct experiments previously impossible in rural areas, and a library filled with thousands of books in multiple languages. She also established a scholarship program that would ensure no child was denied education due to their family's financial circumstances. Education is the foundation of transformation, she explained to the gathered village leaders as construction began. Our children will have opportunities that we could never have imagined. But the school was just the beginning. Amara's next project was the construction of a comprehensive medical facility that would serve the entire region. She brought in qualified doctors and nurses from the capital city and neighboring countries, offering them competitive salaries and modern equipment that made practicing medicine in rural areas both effective and rewarding. The medical center included an emergency room, surgical facilities, a maternity ward, and specialized clinics for treating the most common health problems in the region. She also established a mobile medical unit that could reach remote villages and provide health care to people who had never seen a doctor. For the first time in the village's history, mothers didn't have to watch their children suffer from preventable diseases. Families didn't have to choose between buying food and seeking medical care. The fear of illness that had haunted the community for generations began to fade as quality health care became accessible to everyone. The water project was perhaps the most transformative of all her initiatives. Amara funded the drilling of clean water wells throughout the region and established a water treatment plant that could serve dozens of communities. The contaminated water that had caused so much illness and death became a thing of the past. She also invested in a comprehensive sanitation system, including proper sewage treatment and waste management facilities. The improvements in public health were immediate and dramatic, with rates of waterborne diseases dropping to nearly zero within the first year. But Amara's vision extended far beyond basic infrastructure. She understood that lasting change required economic opportunity, so she established a comprehensive business development program that would create jobs and encourage entrepreneurship throughout the region. The microcredit program she created provided small loans to villagers who wanted to start businesses, along with training in business management, accounting, and marketing. Fatima, the trader who had once mocked her for digging holes in her garden, became one of the first beneficiaries of the program. "I don't deserve your kindness," Fatima said when Amara personally approved her loan application, tears streaming down her face. "I was cruel to you when you needed support most." "The past is the past," Amara replied gently. "What matters now is what we build together for the future." With her loan, Fatima expanded her trading business, eventually employing dozens of people and creating a distribution network that connected rural producers with urban markets. Her success inspired other villagers to start their own businesses, creating a cycle of economic growth that transformed the entire region. Amara also created an agricultural development program that introduced modern farming techniques, provided quality seeds and equipment, and established cooperative marketing systems that allowed farmers to get fair prices for their products. The same soil that had revealed the oil now produced abundant harvests that fed the community and generated income through sales to neighboring regions. The transformation of Kimbala attracted attention from across the country and beyond. Government officials, development organizations, and journalists came to see how one woman's vision had revolutionized an entire community. Amara's story became a case study in sustainable development, taught in universities and discussed at international conferences. Television crews arrived to document the changes, and Amara found herself being interviewed by reporters from around the world. But she always used these opportunities to highlight the achievements of her community rather than focusing on her personal success. "I am not the story," she would tell journalists. "The story is what happens when people are given the opportunity to reach their potential. Look at our children in their modern classrooms, our families with access to health care, our entrepreneurs building businesses. That is the real story." Chief Kofi, humbled by Amara's generosity despite his past treatment of her, approached her one day with tears in his eyes and a proposal that shocked the entire village. "Amara," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "I was wrong about you in every way possible. I let my pride and prejudice blind me to your true character. You have shown us what real leadership looks like, what it means to put community above self. Will you accept the position of village chief? Will you lead us officially as you have already been leading us in practice?" The offer was unprecedented. Never in the village's history had leadership been transferred to someone who had been so thoroughly rejected by the community. But the transformation Amara had brought about was so complete and so beneficial that even the most traditional villagers supported the proposal. But Amara declined the formal title with grace and humility. "I don't need a title to serve my people," she said. "Leadership isn't about position or ceremony, it's about action and service. I will continue to work for our community's betterment, but I will do so as your neighbor and friend, not as your chief." Her refusal to accept formal power only increased the respect and admiration people felt for her. Here was someone who had the opportunity to claim ultimate authority over those who had rejected her, but chose instead to serve without seeking recognition or control. As the years passed, Kimbala became known throughout the region and beyond as a model community. The village that had once been forgotten and ignored was now featured in development textbooks and visited by delegations from other countries who wanted to learn from its success. Children who had grown up in poverty and ignorance now became doctors, teachers, engineers, and business leaders. Many of them chose to return to their home region after completing their education, bringing additional skills and knowledge that continued to fuel the community's growth. The young people who had once left for opportunities in distant cities now found reasons to stay or return home. They started businesses, raised families, and contributed to a growing economy that provided opportunities for everyone. Amara's mansion, while still impressive, was no longer the most notable building in Kimbala. It was surrounded by schools, clinics, businesses, and modern homes where families thrived. The landscape had been completely transformed, not just physically but socially and economically. International organizations began inviting Amara to speak at conferences about sustainable development, community leadership, and the responsible use of natural resources. Her story inspired similar projects across Africa and beyond, showing that oil wealth could be used to benefit entire communities rather than just enriching individuals. She established the Amara Foundation, which provided funding and expertise to help other communities develop sustainable development projects. The foundation's work extended far beyond Kimbala, supporting education, healthcare, and economic development initiatives throughout the region. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Amara's legacy was how she remained unchanged at her core despite her wealth and international recognition. She still woke up early each morning to walk through the village, checking on projects and talking with community members. She still remembered what it felt like to be hungry, rejected, and hopeless, and she used those memories to guide her decisions. "Never forget where you came from," she would tell the young people who sought her advice. "Success is not about escaping your past, it's about using your past to create a better future for others." Her story became part of the village's oral tradition, passed down from generation to generation. Children would gather around elders in the evening to hear about the woman who had been mocked for her poverty but had transformed their entire world through her generosity and vision. Today, decades after that first drop of oil seeped through the soil in her garden, Amara is remembered not just as the woman who discovered oil, but as the leader who proved that true wealth comes from lifting others up. Her legacy lives on in every child who receives an education, every family that has access to healthcare, every entrepreneur who builds a successful business, and every person who understands that leadership is about service, not power. The village that once rejected her now celebrates her as their greatest hero. And Amara, the woman who was once mocked for her poverty, had indeed become a legend, not because of what she gained, but because of what she gave away. Her story stands as a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness, generosity, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves the opportunity to reach their potential. In the end, she had achieved something far more valuable than wealth. She had created a legacy of hope, compassion, and community transformation that would endure long after her oil wells ran dry. The greatest treasure she had discovered wasn't beneath the ground, but within herself, the capacity to turn suffering into strength, rejection into resilience, and personal success into collective prosperity.